Hello, voyagers, watchers, late-night nibblers, and kettle whistlers. Mina stood atop a basket of oranges in the market square, hair a wild anchor of curls, sling at her hip like a friendly question mark. You've tuned in at exactly the right moment. We're about to save breakfast, lunch, dinner, and, if we hurry, the entire Pebble Isles. Beside her, Brohm lifted a tray from the oven of his traveling cart. He was broad-shouldered, river-calm, and dusted head to boot with flour, as if a friendly cloud kept mistaking him for a mountain. "I brought test batches," he rumbled. "Some are very brave." On the Pebble Isles, bravery had a taste. It rose out of dough with the dawn and cooled on windowsills in the lull of afternoon. People said it came from the wind that forgot to be a storm, the way it passed through wheat fields and left behind a tune. If you listened closely to Brohm's loaves, you could hear it thrumming, a crust-soft hymn that made your spine taller. Today, the tune had changed. A low, metallic hum had snuck into the melody, like a zipper closing on the horizon. At the far edge of the jade-green sea, ships approached, gray, angular, precise, the Imperion's Bureau of Unnecessary Improvements. "They've come to help," Mina said, putting air quotes around the word so fiercely that two gulls fell in love overhead. "Which means they'll take, catalog, measure, label, and leave us with a pamphlet explaining why we're happier now." Brohm's smile was sad. "I made extra rolls for the welcome table. We'll weaponize hospitality," Mina declared. "But we also need a plan." The Imperion flagship cut water like a subtraction. Banners clanked. A brass ramp unfolded onto the dock, and down marched Commissioner Vellum, a man so paper-colored he looked filed. He wore a coat of stamped approvals and carried a pen like a spear. "Citizens of these," he said, gesturing vaguely at the 27 glittering islets like someone counting bees, "by decree of culinary standardization, Sub-Statute 4C, paragraph, ahem. The substance known locally as the singing loaf is to be surrendered for improvement." Mina hopped down from the oranges, bowed, and offered a basket. "Welcome. Have a bite and think bun. It helps you consider whether you truly want to fight 1,000 mamas with rolling pins." Vellum sniffed. "You threaten the Imperion?" "Sir," she said, "I promised the rolling pins would win." Brohm stepped forward with a tray. "Please eat while we discuss." Hungry minds audit unfairly. A junior officer, all angles and eagerness, grabbed a bun. He chewed, blinked, and suddenly looked 6 summers younger, the kind of young that remembers kites. "Oh," he whispered. Vellum yanked the bun from the officer. "Confiscated," he said, and took a bite. His posture loosened precisely 1 unit. HMPH. Edible. He recovered. "We begin the seizure at sunset." The village buzzed. Some fetched ledgers, some fetched lutes. Children braided the pier with ribbons. The sea, who hated monotony, pitched little mischief waves at the Imperion hulls. Mina paced. "We can't outfight an empire. But we can outstory it." Brohm scratched his beard, releasing a tiny snowfall of flour. "We could hide the recipe." "Better," said Mina. "We'll turn it into a quest." She climbed the bell tower, rang 3 quick chimes, and shouted so the words bounced across water. "Islanders, bake your bravest. We're calling a congress of crumbs." By dusk, the square was cinnamon warm with steam. The elders of heat and leaven gathered, Aunt Surrey of the Pepper Reef, who told fortunes from bubbles in stew, Lady Juke of the Lavender Key, whose yeast starter was old enough to vote, and a dozen more whose aprons were maps of memory. "The Imperion can seize what sits," said Mina, "but not what sings and runs." We'll scatter the song into 3 parts, each guarded by someone who knows how to say no in a beautiful way. Brohm nodded. The starter, the flower of forget-me-not, and the tide salt. Exactly. Mina pointed to the north. The starter, alive, temperamental, and brave, must be carried to the cloud shelf, where thunder keeps its anthology. The flower grows in the fields that move, led by goats who prefer poetry to fences. The tide salt forms only where a storm pauses long enough to admire its reflection. Aunt Surrey tightened her scarf. And who will weave the parts back into one voice? Mina grinned and thumped Brohm's shoulder. We will, with your help. The village cheered, then went quiet as a shadow touched the square. The Imperion had erected a temporary improvement pavilion, the kind of building that could land on a meadow and make it forget it had ever liked flowers. Vellum raised his pen. Final notice. Final toast, Mina countered. Brohm handed out cups of fennel spark tea. The last light slid over the pavilion, and for a moment, each rivet gleamed as if it wanted to be a star. Then the bells rang midnight, and the Congress of Crumbs began its scattering. Mina and Brohm took the starter, warm, breathing, grumpy in its clay jar, and slipped down to the dock where a boat waited. A stubby skiff with a mast stitched out of kites. Its name, painted in lemon, was the Maybe. Hello, voyagers, Mina whispered again, this time to the night and anyone beyond it who was listening. Stay close. We're going to outrun a rule. They pushed off, the kites snapped awake, and the Maybe skimmed into a sky full of crumbs of moon. Behind them, the Imperion pavilion sprouted a fence. The fence met the village's laughter and got confused. The links loosened, the hinges hummed along. On the water, Brohm set the course. Mina set a trap. She fastened one of Brohm's bravest loaves to a string and let it trail behind like bait. The Imperion's smallest patrol boat could not resist. Like a cat to a ribbon, it followed, quietly, hungrily, until Mina tugged the string, and the loaf bobbed ahead, and the patrol drifted, nibbling, right into a patch of singing seaweed that politely tangled its propeller and asked for a story. The junior officer from earlier laughed despite himself. Dawn painted the world with apricot jam. The cloud shelf rose. A cliff where thunder rested to read. Staircases of wind led up, each step a lesson in balance. Mina tied the starter jar to her belt. If I fall, catch me. I always do, Brohm said. They climbed. Halfway up, a voice boomed, password. Mina shaded her eyes. On a ledge sat an old woman knitting lightning into lace. Her spectacles flashed with the weather. Gaffer Tempest? Mina asked. Granny Tempest, if you please. Password. Mina thought. Thunder is just rain saying what it meant to write. Granny Tempest chuckled. Wrong, but flattering. Try again. Brohm coughed. Please? The old woman melted into smiles. Correct. She gestured them up. Manners open more doors than answers. At the top, thunder was shelved like books, each rumble bound in leather. Mina opened the starter jar. The smell wafted out, earthy, exultant. The thunder leaned in to listen. It's not for you to keep, Mina said softly, but for you to teach how to remember. Lightning threaded the air like a needle. A spark kissed the starter, and it burbled, learning a note that could not be erased. Granny Tempest tapped Mina's forehead with a knitting needle. You carry too many plans. Leave one here. Mina left her most ruthless scheme. A plan that would have tricked the Imperion into sinking its own flagship. It felt good to set it down. Her mind stood up straighter without it. They thanked the sky and descended. The Maybe waited with gulls arguing over syntax. Next, Mina said, the fields that move. They sailed until the sea turned into grass. No one remembered how that worked, it just did. The way laughter turned into courage when enough people caught it. The boat slid through green waves that were blades instead of water. Goat bells chimed. A boy popped up from the grass, freckles like constellations. You're late, he announced. The goats already chose today's poem. Brohm blinked. Goats read? They recite, said the boy, as if this were obvious. I'm Fen. I shepherd the metaphors. Mina bowed. We need the flower of forget-me-not. Fen sniffed the starter jar. That one remembers too much. The flower will help it forget the parts that hurt without losing the parts that teach. He whistled, and the grass rolled in green dunes until a herd bounced into view, bearded philosophers with impossible eyes. The lead goat, who wore a crown of burrs like a rumor, cleared his throat and recited. Fence me not, my hooves are verbs. I climb the cliff that thought disturbs. I eat the sign that says, do not. And in my belly, rules are not. The goats stamped approval. Fen handed Mina a pouch. It was heavier than it looked, like a memory you didn't know you'd made. Freshly milled by windmill tongues, he said. Don't sneeze while the bag is open, or you'll forget what you were Would you? What? Mina quickly tied the pouch. Noted. They were nearly back to sea when the grass darkened. Imperion automatons, tripods with ledger faces, strode over the hill, pens twirling like lances. Vellum's voice came thinly from a megaphone. Do not resist standardization. Compliance is a kind of applause. Mina whispered, Brohm. He nodded. Together they lifted the boat. The goats watched, impressed. With a shout that was mostly laughter, they slid the maybe onto the steepest grass dune and surfed. The automatons tried to pursue, but grass is allergic to clipboards. The tripods sank politely into a patch of wildflowers that insisted, firmly, on blotting out paperwork with petals. By twilight, sea returned. They had the starter and the flour. Only the Tide salt remained, the most stubborn ingredient of all. It formed where storms paused to consider kindness. Mina looked at the horizon. A storm was folding its arms there, trying to look severe. We'll ask it what joke it likes. Storms like jokes? Brohm asked. Everyone likes a joke that doesn't belittle anyone else. They sailed toward the bruise-colored sky. On the flagship, vellum paced. The junior officer, whose name was Pern, held a confiscated bun he had saved. He didn't eat it. He just carried it like a letter he was afraid to read. He watched the maybe shrink into distance and whispered, almost to himself, good luck. The storm heard, and turned. The storm was a cathedral of dark, its spires made of wave. It grumbled like old furniture. The maybe hopped from trough to crest, kites snapping like laundry in a gale. Hello, Mina shouted into the wind. We brought a joke. Lightning wrote a questioning mark across the clouds. Brohm cupped his mouth. What did the wave say to the shore? The storm leaned lower, curious. It said, I'll be right back. A beat. Then thunder rolled. The kind that starts reluctant and ends up roaring because it can't help itself. The storm tried not to smile and failed magnificently. A corridor opened in the rain, a bright aisle of calm leading toward a rocky cove. Thank you, Mina said, and the storm blushed pearly and pretended it was just lightning again. In the cove, tide pools glowed. In one, a silver salt spiral grew, grain by grain, around a pebble the size of a heartbeat. Mina knelt. Tide salt, she breathed. Don't touch. Ask. Brohm bowed to the pool the way bakers bow to ovens, with reverence for what heat knows. We need your song, he said. To keep a people whole when someone tries to slice them. The spiral pulsed. Then, like frost unraveling, it loosened into crystals, each a tiny prism. The pool sang a note so soft it could only be heard by promises. Mina held out a jar. The crystals floated in, chiming. They had all three parts. Now we must weave them, said Mina. But not alone. The storm escorted them into clear sky. As the maybe skimmed toward the horizon, flags bloomed on the sea. The librarian-pirate queen approached in a ship that was part library, part thunderclap, sails stitched from overdue notices and maps of places that didn't want to be found. Permission to board wisdom, Mina called. Permission granted, came the queen's voice, rich as a story told twice. She stood at the rail, gold hair braided with bookmarks. You bring ingredients and trouble. I like both. I am Isolde, keeper of indexed plunder, she who reads storms. Brohm bowed so deeply his flower dust made a small weather pattern. I am Brohm. This is Mina. Isolde examined the jars. You must bake a song. My ovens are at your command. But first, attacks. Mina's hand went to her sling. Isolde laughed. Not coin. A tale. Pirate law. Mina grinned. Gladly. She told them about the goats that recited, about Granny Tempest's password, about a fence that could not survive laughter. The crew, sailors with ink-stained fingers and pockets full of quotation, cheered. Isolde's eyes shone. To the galley, the queen cried. Below deck, ovens purred. They were unlike any Mina had known. They were named. This was Oven Patience, who warmed slowly but remembered you. This was Oven Boldness, who leapt to heat like a cat to a windowsill. They sang to each other in cliques. Brohm laid out bowls. Starter, he said. Mina unclasped the clay jar, and the living dough sighed. Flour, he continued. Mina sifted the forget-me-not, and air turned thoughtful. Salt, he finished, and he didn't have to ask. The crystals leapt like trout, dissolving into the mix with a chord that made every spine in the room straighten with gentle dignity. Isolde watched. What does bravery taste like? Like admitting your voice shook and speaking anyway, Mina said. Like sharing the last slice, Brohm added. They mixed, kneaded. The dough pressed back like a conversation that respected you. Brohm split it into three. One for the Isles, one for the librarian-pirates, and one meant for the Imperion, though none of them said that aloud yet. They shaped loaves and tucked them into Oven Patience. When they emerged, crusts crackled the way old books do when they're relieved to be opened. Now, Isolde said, we must return without being returned to. She arched an eyebrow. The Imperion is closing in. Indeed, Vellum's fleet had fanned out like a measuring tape. The pavilion back in the village had sprouted a tower. From its top, the commissioner recited sub-statutes to the moon, which ignored him with great professionalism. Queen Isolde, Mina said, how are you at choreography? The queen touched the hilt of her index sword. I can alphabetize a storm while waltzing. Perfect. We will dance our boats. They met the Imperion in the narrows between islands where the water narrows into song. The librarian-pirate fleet swooped and spun, pages snapping like wains. The maybe darted like a punctuation mark, comma for pause, dash for surprise, period for full stop when needed. Vellum lifted a megaphone. By the authority, Mina cupped her hands. By the audacity, he frowned. Of improvement, of joy, she said. And then the dance began. It looked like chaos and felt like music. The Imperion ships tried to lock into formation, but the narrows were written in a meter they had never learned. The pirate ships cut in with a foxtrot. The maybe invented a step called, avoiding a lecture. Brohm, laughing, tossed tiny rolls like confetti onto the Imperion decks. Sailors caught them on instinct. Some popped them in their mouths, some held them close and breathed. Pern, the junior officer, broke ranks to catch a roll that whistled like a sparrow. He clutched it, then looked at his captain, at Vellum, at the sky. He set the roll down with reverence and raised his voice. "Sir," he called, surprising himself, "permission to listen?" Vellum blinked. "To what?" Pern gestured. "To them. To our own bellies. To the way the wind is trying to teach us not to march off a cliff." A silence folded itself around the Narrows. It was not an Imperion silence, approved, stamped, scheduled. It was the kind that happens in theaters in the heartbeat before the curtain rises. Then Vellum said, very quietly, "No." He snapped his pen. Automata unfurled. Nets glittered. The librarian-pirates buckled. But not before Isolde leapt to the maybe with a package. A map made of silk the color of a dare. "Take this," she commanded, to the assembly that laughs. "If you can get the Imperion to attend, they must listen. Those are the rules that even rulers obey." "What is the assembly?" Brohm asked. "A court that only convenes when the joke is good enough," Isolde said. "Go." Mina unfurled the map. It refolded itself into a kite. The maybe's mast shivered with delight. They shot through the Narrows, skimming past astonished fish. Behind them, Isolde's ship rang its bell. 1, 2, 3. A code that meant, "We will be late. Save us a plate." The assembly that laughs sat on an island that had once been a whale's daydream. Amphitheater steps curved around a stage made of driftwood. Carved into the stone above were the laws. No cruelty disguised as humor. No silence enforced by fear. No audience counted as property. Mina and Brohm arrived with their 3 loaves and a storm at their back, all of it out of breath. "Welcome," said the assembly's usher, a dignified pelican with a sash. "Present your case. And your snack." Mina bowed. "We accuse the Imperion of improving us until we vanish. We offer proof, not in pain, but in taste." The usher nodded. "Applause will be counted as testimony." They broke bread. The first loaf went to islanders who had gathered, weary of being helped into sameness. The second to the librarian-pirates who limped in late, sails singed but eyes fierce. The third, Mina held up for the Imperion. Vellum marched into the amphitheater, bristling with ink. Behind him, officers hesitated at the threshold, as all do who fear laughter might rearrange their furniture. "Welcome," Mina said, and meant it. "Please sit where the jokes can find you." "Your court is unrecognized," Vellum declared. "Your bread is unregulated. Your island is something." "Perhaps unafraid?" offered the usher, kind enough to let him borrow the word. Pern moved to the side, eyes on everything. When Mina caught his gaze, she saw a boy who remembered kites. The assembly called for opening statements. Mina stepped forward, palms open. "We do not ask to be untouched by the world. We ask to touch it back in our way. Our bread does not make you brave. It helps you hear your own courage humming. The Imperion wants the recipe without the listening, the song without the singer. We ask you to taste the difference." Brohm sliced the third loaf. The aroma rose. Night markets, rain on tin, lullabies. Vellum took a piece because he believed himself immune. He chewed once, and his shoulders dropped as if they'd been carrying a piano full of ledgers. "What do you hear?" Mina asked softly. Vellum swallowed. He closed his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was almost human. "I hear my father telling a joke he thought wasn't funny and my mother laughing like it was a ladder out of a well." The assembly hummed. Applause rustled like palm leaves. "Commissioner," Mina said, "sit with that sound. We'll wait." Vellum opened his eyes. The pen twitched in his hand, seeking an order. Mina took a breath. She had one plan left, the one she'd kept, a gambit of kindness sharp enough to cut. She lifted her sling, placed inside it the smallest roll, barely a mouthful, and spun. It arced through the air and landed, delicately, in the megaphone's bell. The roll amplified, sang, and every bystander heard their favorite laugh played back to them. Low chortle, wheezy snort, helpless giggle, tight-shouldered release. People cried. Some laughed because they were crying. Some cried because they were finally laughing. Pern stood and said, "To no one's orders, I would like to resign from being afraid." The usher banged a gavel with his beak. "Accepted." Vellum stared at the bread in his hands as if it were a doorknob. "I cannot authorize this," he whispered. Then, louder, as if remembering his lines, "Seize the." Lightning traced a question mark in the sky. Granny Tempest's voice drifted on the wind. "Password." Vellum frowned. "What?" The crowd shouted, as one, because good jokes are contagious. "Please." The storm laughed. The amphitheater's stones trembled with delight. The assembly that laughs declared a recess called cake. During cake, treaties that couldn't be written got baked. Mina found Vellum at the edge, looking out at ships that were beginning to wonder who they had been before they were fleets. "You can still win," she told him gently. "Just decide that winning means everyone goes home with their name spelled right." Vellum rubbed his temple. The pen in his hand felt suddenly heavy and small. "You think I can undo an empire with manners?" "No," Mina said, "with policy. But we can start with manners." Pern approached, saluted, then remembered he had resigned from fear and switched to a nod. "Sir, and Miss Mina, and Mr. Brohm, there is a way." "A clause." Vellum blinked. "What clause?" Pern recited from memory, because bread had fed his confidence. Decree of Culinary Standardization, Substatute 4C, Paragraph, ahem. Subsection 9. If a recipe is proven to be more song than substance, and if removing it would lessen laughter, then standardization is waived under the principle of non-diminishment of joy. Vellum stared. "That's obscure." "Sir," Pern said, "you wrote it. The night your daughter made a mud pie that made you laugh like a ladder." Vellum's mouth opened. He looked suddenly very, very tired. "I had forgotten." "Flower of forget-me-not," Brohm said softly. "It leaves room for good forgettings, too. But this one we can keep." The assembly reconvened. Vellum stepped forward, voice steady. "By the principle of non-diminishment of joy, he swallowed. "I waive standardization. The Pebble Isles will keep their recipe. We will, instead, request an exchange program." Mina lifted a brow. "Exchange what?" "Stories," Vellum said, "and jokes. And a very small number of buns." The crowd thundered its approval. The usher beaked his gavel with flourish. "So recorded." At sunset, the librarian-pirates unfurled strings of lanterns. The Imperion ships anchored, crew leaning on rails, listening to a concert they had almost outlawed. Mina and Brohm sat on the stage's edge, feet dangling over the driftwood. "Hello again, voyagers," Mina said into the orange light. "We did not defeat an empire. We made it remember how to sit down." Brohm passed her a slice. "We still have to bring the song home." They sailed at dawn. The village smelled like hope that had been proofed overnight. Bunting zigzagged between date palms. The temporary improvement pavilion had wilted, some said due to humidity, some said due to the faint mockery of the pelicans. Mina leapt to the dock and shouted, "We brought it back." Children poured from alleys, hands sticky with guava. Aunt Surrey waved a ladle like a mayor's baton. Lady Juke dabbed at her eyes with a napkin stolen from a royal banquet 20 years ago and 500 smiles back. Brohm lifted the 3 loaves. "One for the Isles," he said. "Cheers. One for our new friends." The librarian-pirates, anchored beyond the reef, rang bells in reply. "And one for the Imperion." A hush, then nods, the kind that are cautious, hopeful, adult. Vellum approached, coat less stiff, ink stains like constellations across his cuffs. Pern walked beside him, no longer junior to his own heart. Vellum stopped a respectful distance away. "We request permission to join your festival," he said. Mina glanced at the crowd. "Granted, on 2 conditions." Vellum braced. "Name them." "First," she said, "you eat before you speak." He blinked, then inclined his head. "Wise." "Second," Mina continued, "you help us build the feast of everyone's name." This was an ancient Pebble Isles tradition, half legend, half logistics. Once a decade, the village set one long table and every person brought a dish that tasted like their name felt in their mouth. No one ate their own. Everyone ate each other's until they learned to pronounce each name's spice. The Imperion had always declined invitations. An empire prefers nameless mouths. But this time, Vellum said, "Teach us." The day became a tapestry. Isolde's crew set up a field library where recipes were written as songs, kept in a crate marked "Borrow kindly, return with a story." Imperion sailors, at first stiff, then sheepish, took off their boots and helped children string lanterns. Pern climbed the bell tower and, under Mina's direction, hung a kite that could be folded into a map that could be folded into a napkin that could be folded into a secret. This delighted the children almost as much as it annoyed any remaining clipboards. Brohm and Mina led a baking, no, a binding. The starter learned the new thunder note. The flour sighed away the bitterness of long fear. The Tide salt set the taste of pauses that let other people speak. Ovens laughed. Crusts cracked like polite applause. "While we bake," Mina announced to a crowd packed with elbows and expectation, "tell me your names and what they taste like." Aunt Surrey said. "My name tastes like pepper that apologizes for being late." Lady Juke, said Lady Juke. "Lavender gumdrop," with a stern afterthought. Pern, said Pern, almost timidly. "Mint tea that remembers winter but forgives it." Vellum, said Vellum, surprising himself by joining. He considered. "Paper warmed by a sun you didn't plan for." Mina grinned. "Mina tastes like lime over soup when someone says, 'Try this.'" "And Brohm?" Brohm blushed. "Toast, with more butter than is reasonable. Which is just enough." They ate their names and each other's. They pronounced and mispronounced, corrected and were corrected, laughed and were forgiven. The village square transformed into a grammar of kindness. Mistakes welcomed, vowels warned, consonants softened. At twilight, the feast of everyone's name lined a single table that ran from the bakery to the boatyard. On it sat courage soup, regret stew sweetened with apology, rice that popped into compliments, fish that told jokes with a straight face, breads braided into stories. At the center, the 3 singing loaves. "Before we slice," Mina called, "we give thanks." She pointed, not upward or downward, but around. To the sky that had knit lightning into courtesy. To the goats who ate rules until they turned into poems. To Isolde, whose ship shelved storms. To Vellum and Pern, who had found a clause and a spine. To all the mothers, fathers, aunties, uncles, neighbors, and necessary strangers who had rolled dough when hands shook. Also, she added, to you watching, wherever you are, thank you for listening. Stories need ears like bread needs heat. The crowd murmured the islanders' amen, which is They broke the loaves. Music rose from places that had never meant to be instruments. Fence wires, kettle rims, window latches. People stood a little taller. Not because the bread gave them what they didn't have, but because it gently took away what they didn't need. The weight of rehearsed smallness. Vellum chewed thoughtfully, then did something astonishing. He took off his coat of approvals and folded it into a cushion for a child to stand on so she could reach the table. A courier rushed in, breathless, from the cliff road. Commissioner, he panted, the High Auditor sails to inspect your waiver. Vellum looked to Mina, to Brohm, to the crowd. He lifted his chin. Let them come. They will eat first. The square laughed like a choir. But Mina's eyes narrowed not with suspicion. Those had been burned away by the new recipe, but with readiness. We'll be hospitable, she said. And precise. The High Auditor's vessel arrived lean and tall, sails stiff as posture. The auditor descended in garments that sounded like arithmetic. Their eyes were mirror cool. State your justification, they intoned. Vellum stepped forward. He did not bow, he did not bristle. By Sub-Statute 4C, subsection 9, under the principle of non-diminishment of joy, I waived standardization upon assembly order. He gestured to the amphitheater bell on the table. A gift from the usher Pelican, who had decided retirement was for the birds. Taste was taken as testimony. The auditor's mouth twitched. Taste is subjective. Mina lifted a slice. So is cruelty when not named. Try this. If you cannot taste how it is not cruel, then we will teach you the word first. She smiled, friendly as a rope thrown to someone who may or may not want rescuing, but thrown all the same. The auditor hesitated. Then, because rules demand evidence and appetites demand honesty, they took the bite. They chewed. A long time later, very quietly, as if surprising themselves, they said, my grandmother told jokes like ladders. Climbed one tonight, didn't you? Aunt Surrey said gently. The auditor blinked away a weather system. Proceed, they whispered. Then, more formally, waiver confirmed. Exchange program, also confirmed. Excellent, Isolde said, stepping forward with an inkpot shaped like a wave. I will draft the syllabus. Intro to noticing. Advanced listening. Bureaucracy for the tender-spined. Laughter feathered the square. The High Auditor almost smiled. Night fell, not like a curtain but like a shawl. Lanterns were passed. Plates were collected. Songs were hummed into the cracks of the day. Mina and Brohm walked to the pier. The maybe rocked, kites sleeping. Waves lipped the stones in old lullabies. Hello, voyagers, Mina said softly to the dark and to you. If you're still with us, thank you for crossing seas and statutes. Brohm handed her a heel of bread. We kept the recipe safe, he said, by giving it away properly. Mina chewed. The taste was a mirror. She saw herself, braver, not because she knew what to do, but because she could ask, please, and hear the thunder say, correct. Tomorrow? Brohm asked. We deliver buns to the pavilion, Mina said, mischievous. It has a hole where a rule used to be. We'll plant flowers in it. He laughed the laugh of toast with too much butter. They stood shoulder to flower-dusted shoulder while the kites dreamed of maps, and the village dreamed of tables long enough to fit everyone, and the sea dreamed of more jokes good enough to open storms. Good night, watchers. Good night, kettle whistlers, Mina whispered, and Brohm added, Save room for breakfast. The moon, conspirator and lamp nodded approval.